Well, hey, friends, welcome to the Wonder of Tolkien channel. My name is Christopher. This is the first interview ever on this channel, which means a couple things. Super excited about getting this out there to people who want to know more about Tolkien, Middle Earth, and spreading some wonder and joy. And also because it's the first interview, it could mean a whole bunch of stuff could happen. So I'm really excited to have our friend and guest, John Hendrix, on here. If you don't know John, he's a New York Times bestselling author, which is no little thing. He's an illustrator whose creative work just stretches through graphic art, beautiful graphic art, children's literature, and historical nonfiction. And because this is a Tolkien channel, we are here to also nerd out about something very specific, your new book. I'm not sure if I can even show this because it's not out yet.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, it's coming out in 5 days.
Yeah, next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday. And I looked on Amazon, John. This is so exciting. I'm sure you know this. It is number one and number 10 in children's literary biographies. Did you know that?
I know, that's pretty great, right?
Yeah, I mean, to have your hardcover and your Kindle edition up there already as pre-orders is super exciting. So I'll leave a link in the show notes so you can be able to pre-order it. We're going to pre-order a couple to give away to friends. And so, yeah, I'm so excited to nerd out. We were emailing back and forth, and one of the things you said was I could talk for hours about these guys.
It's true.
So, we won't be on here for hours, but we are going to nerd out. And so I just got to say, before we jump in, I was so captivated by this book, by not just the story you told. I am a Tolkien nerd. I just got into Tolkien 4 years ago and just deep dive. I mean, these are the books behind me. Spent my inheritance on Tolkien books. And so, but the story is beautiful and the art complemented it so well. And I learned things I didn't know. And Amazon says this is for 10 to 14-year-olds. I thought it was for 25 to 40-year-olds because there were some concepts that I weren't even sure I understood as you went through this. So,
well, it is one of the weird things. I write books typically for middle grade or YA audiences. And really what that means is you're just taking something that's very complex and trying to bring some legibility to it. Yeah. And in fact, that's a skill that lots of adults, need in their reading too. So, it does apply to a lot of audiences. And I do think I'm going to lose some 10-year-olds in the back matter. But I would rather 10-year-olds push themselves and read up and try to learn about some of these concepts and have it be kind of a wide range book.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, I was going through it. I love the way you kind of took some deeper thoughts and you can do a different journey. And
the book is structured a little bit like a choose your own adventure book where there are moments in the story where you can take a little portal. Doors become very important in this book. You can take a little portal to the back matter, and it was basically my chance to do like an illustrated footnote about different parts. Where does the fairy tale come from? The history of fantasy, and those things you can easily skip if you just want to cruise through the story of Tolkien and Lewis themselves. But yeah, it was fun to give readers a way to sort of have a little adventure inside of the story themselves.
It was so cool. I was like a kid in the candy shop, like flipping through. Okay, I gotta go to this part and this part, and I was like coming out of my room, showing my wife and kids, and they're like, "Okay, wow, you need to slow down. You just got this book, and so fun." So I want to start back just in your own personal background with Lewis and Tolkien. I would love to know. No one writes a book like this without having probably been impacted by these gentlemen. So before even the genesis of the book, what was your personal interaction experience with Lewis and Tolkien growing up?
Well, they were my portal into imagination, really. Like The Hobbit was the first book I remember carrying around with me, even after I had already read it, because it meant so much to me. The illustrations meant so much to me. I was such a kid that was so in love with art and fantasy art that any book that had a dragon on it, that had swords of any kind, I wanted to be in that world. And so to me, the book started really as a kind of thank you to them. I mean, I'm indebted to them, both as an artist and as a Christian. They not only validated the value of fantasy and fairy tale, but also imagination within the scope of the Christian faith, the Christian worldview. And so I actually read, this is, people like think I'm insane, but I read Narnia the first time as a kid and made no connections to the Christian story. Wow. Like, to me, it was just a great fantasy story. And then, of course, later, I mean, it wasn't that much later, but it was like, oh, I get the, at least in Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, the allegorical nature of Aslan. And Lewis himself always sort of pushed back on allegory. He always said it was more of a supposal. It was
Mhm.
like, what if the concept of um, the creator's son, or the sort of person that holds the universe together, in this case Narnia, gave himself up to save that universe? Like, he sort of like, what if we translate that into another time and space, and what would that feel like?
Wow.
And in fact, that goes back to Tolkien and Lewis's like connection with Norse mythology. They loved the sacrifice of Balder even before Lewis was a Christian. And so, there's all these
So
connections you can make inside of that.
wow. Yeah. And so, I mean, especially when Lewis talks about, I think in one of his essays, like, I didn't even mean to do this. It kind of came out this kind of way, which is so interesting. Like, just like Tolkien talking about how he wrote his books and things just unfolded out of like an overflow of their hearts. And so you were impacted by them. You have done other books. There's a book on Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his attempts to, why this book? Like, why tell this story? Why not just one on Lewis or one on Tolkien? Why their friendship?
Yeah, I mean, you could easily do a biography on each of them, and in fact, there have been great films made on both of them. One called
Yeah.
Tolkien that came out a couple years ago, really about his youth and leading up to World War I, and then Shadowlands about Lewis's relationship with Joy. But it, to me, really, the thing I love about their story, I think most people know they were friends. They were really colleagues at Oxford and the Inklings. People know that shape of their story, but I don't think they really get the full debt that they owed to one another in their life and in their creative work. I mean, Tolkien could never have finished Lord of the Rings without Lewis. I'm convinced.
Wow.
Um, and much like their friendship is fascinating, because much like Galadriel gives the Fellowship the sort of perfect gift they need to complete their journey, Lewis
Wow.
and Tolkien did that to each other. For Lewis, Tolkien gave him like the way to read the story of the world correctly, because he was
Wow.
this atheist. He was this sort of cynical person who came out of World War I, like many veterans,
Mhm.
looking for a way to not hate the things that he loved. But um, Tolkien gave him a way to put Norse mythology, fairy stories, and the stuff that made his heart come alive into a context that was valid. And really, Lewis could never have written his entire body of work without Tolkien's. He didn't do it all, but he was certainly the key that unlocked the door for him.
Wow.
And then for Tolkien, Lewis gave him just sheer encouragement, like, because Tolkien was such a perfectionist. He was so haunted with his own inadequacies, his desire to revise, and Lewis just simply was like a guy who read it and was like, "Bro, this is awesome." And there were several moments where Tolkien got stuck, as he did often,
Yeah.
and would kind of abandon the manuscript over the 17 years it took to write Lord of the Rings. And Lewis, there are several moments in letters where Tolkien talks about Lewis sort of helping him unlock a story problem. I don't think Lewis ever gave him actually any ideas. I just think he allowed him a
Mm.
space and like a resonator, to just help him figure out what to do next. So they both really needed each other in their own journeys.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, I don't think people appreciate that connection. And I'm not going to spoil the ending of your book. It surprised me. It brought me to tears
Oh,
almost.
good.
Seriously,
Oh,
yeah.
good.
I won't spoil it. So you got to get this book and don't go to the end until you read through it.
Yeah, that's right. Just read it through. Well,
Yeah,
and people, I mean, that's one thing that's beautiful. Their friendship is beautiful, but it is
yeah.
also tragic too, because they had this
Mhm.
falling out. They had this, as often happens in the Shadowlands. There are things that come between us and break our fellowship,
Wow,
and so they did have these moments of strife and of misunderstanding and loss.
wow.
And in some ways, it makes a more interesting story. It's actually, it's tragic, but it's also beautiful too. I got to give them a chance at the end of the story to work on that. But
Mm,
yeah, to me, it's such a lovely tale because of how real it is. It's not a fairy tale.
yeah.
um, and the beauty about their story is that I think they needed each other to make
Mm,
their best work, but also they were so indebted to the fellowship around them. So the whole book is about fellowship of one kind or another.
yeah, Yeah, that's so good. I just got done reading The Great War, Tolkien and the Great War by John Garth, and that was just seeing the overlap and seeing how you dove into some of those things with their wartime experience was, yeah,
There's so
that's
much. This book could have had 100 extra pages in it easily. Like
yes.
I cut so much. It's very hard to do this. It's not what you put in, it's what you leave out with these kind of books. And
Yeah.
so, and there were books that I read that I just could not get all the stuff in. There's so many things. So in a lot of ways, this book is just kind of a primer. And if you read this and like it, I have resources in the back of wonderful other books by scholars you can go. I mean, I didn't even jump into any of the stuff from Michael Ward's book Planet Narnia, which sort of is this Tolkien's criticism of Narnia was that it was sort of a haphazard mashup. It was just kind of a stew of stuff, and it wasn't really fully baked. And Michael Ward, sort of in his book Planet Narnia, talks about each Narnia book is sort of pegged like emotionally and philosophically to one of the medieval bodies, solar bodies. And so, and initially you're like, come on. But Lewis was obsessed with the medieval cosmology of the world. And so he lays out the case. Like at first you're like, this cannot be true. And then it feels like this was a mystery that Lewis sort of hid in plain sight for everyone. And so it's actually, that's a wonderful book. I don't even talk about it in this. So it's pretty fun.
Yeah. I'm curious, what surprised you the most as you did your research? And then what was one thing you left out that you would have loved to put in, but you just couldn't?
One thing I left out that it's in the author's note. I felt like I couldn't not mention it, but at the end of their academic careers together, Lewis could never get a chair at Oxford. He was kind of blackballed for the nature of his work being too successful, too commercial. God forbid a professor be a successful trade author, but he just could never get a chair, which is sort of the highest academic rank at Oxford. And Tolkien was really even as their tensions and their friendship was strained, he was really an advocate for Lewis and helped basically get him the chair at Cambridge, the rival university. So he did hold an academic chair at the end of his life. But again, I just couldn't find a way to fit it in narratively to the arc of the story. But it is important. So I did mention it.
There's some like redemption there. And I think if people think their friendship had some issues around joy and jealousy and those kind of things, that it just split off. And you did a good job saying, yes, you didn't shy away from the brokenness and the jealousy of those things. And then you also, there's some reconciliation. And it wasn't like they hated each other. I think people may have a bad
and the book is not a hagiography. It is not meant to say they were perfect people and they did nothing wrong. They were, I mean, to me, they were British men who did not talk about their feelings, who went through an extreme generational trauma when they were very young. And they, I think, deep down meant so much to one another. And actually, you see that in Tolkien's letters after Lewis dies. Like he was split to the core by Lewis's death. And I think he had a lot of regrets. And I just don't think they really addressed stuff that they should have. And despite that, the episode with Tolkien getting Lewis that chair at Magdalen and at Cambridge, it just shows that, deep down he was in his corner, and he felt he was a colleague that he loved, and a friend that he loved. And they're very complicated dudes, despite being, kind of crusty British professors.
I like your, I think in the intro or something, you said Tweety something. You called him Tweety. Oh gosh.
Yeah. Actually, so this is, you cannot pass by this fact. It is easy to forget. They did not know they were Lewis and Tolkien when they were meeting at Eagle and Child to talk about the fantasy world they wanted to make together.
Crazy.
They didn't know. They were 45 years old. They were in the middle of academic careers, making great scholarship at a wonderful university. And then from that moment or series of conversations, they went on to sell 250 million books. And I mean, with both of them have major film properties still being developed today, now 80 whatever years later. So it truly is, it's just crazy that they did that basically by accident. That like people sit down and like, I'm going to write a fantasy story. And man, my hope is that it turns into a blockbuster movie that people
Yeah,
are still watching in 100 years. And they just were like, you know what, we love writing and reading myths. What if we tried to do it? Like it's just it's nuts. It's crazy.
it is nuts. If you read through Tolkien's letters, you probably notice like he's shocked at the kind of applause and the attention and the sales, and he didn't expect it. He didn't think people would. He just did.
And this is the thing that would make most people insane. He did not understand the super fandom. Like he did not get the like people doing the food like the Tolkien Society of America. They would do like, you know, Hobbit parties and the
Mm-hmm.
food and the obsession with the sort of the identity inside of his story that
Yeah,
people now we consider it totally normal, the
yeah,
fandom culture. But I mean, you can make, and I do in the book a little bit, you can make a very easy argument that between Star Trek and Tolkien in the 60s, it basically invented fan culture. And
yeah.
and that was something that Tolkien himself did not fully get. And
Wow.
people would come to his house and be like obsessed with him, and it weirded him out, you know.
I would have been one of those people for sure,
Yes.
knocking on his
Right.
door.
Yeah.
Yeah. With elf ears and everything. um, I want to take a little turn. You're just thinking about the moments they were in the Eagle and Child and they were talking. There's this beautiful illustration. I won't pull it out, but of just kind of the brick laid kind of cut, and you see this them talking and smoking in the back in the room. Your art is a story within this story, and I just wonder because you are a graphic artist, and if you go to I'll put your website in the show notes. Before you got to also check out his sketchbooks, and everything is beautiful. What do you want people to take away, because you're not just telling a story with words, you're telling it with the art? Why spend so much time on the art, and why do you want this art to say something, or what do you want the art to say?
Yeah, it's a great question because, like, why not just write a book that you can read about them, right? Well, the magic of illustration to me is like when you put words and images together. That's the building blocks of what illustration is. You can't have illustration if you don't have words with
Wow.
it. So, what a graphic novel or any kind of visual story can do when you put those two things in context is make a third thing that is neither word nor image. We call that in art school
Mm,
gestalt. You know, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
wow.
So to me, words and pictures together can do more than words alone and then images alone. And
Wow.
so, yes, when you are reading the story and you're reading about them going into Bird and Baby, and you know, in your mind, you're like, oh, I think I can imagine what that looks like. But then you get to see a sort of cutaway of Lewis walking in on a snowy day, hanging his coat up, and simultaneously getting to walk through the pub to the back room where all his friends are waiting. There's a roaring fire. You know, there are things that images do that words can't. And so again, I'm creating in your mind this kind of magic stew of words and images together. And you know, that's how, if I was a kid, that's how I want to read a book. I mean, I'm making books for myself as a 12-year-old, basically.
Wow. Yeah, my inner child was leaping when I saw that stuff. Because
Yeah.
also, I read books on Tolkien and Lewis. I know some of this stuff, but I want to see it. I wish I
Yeah.
was there. So your art is does something that just translates. I love how you had the wizard and the lion.
Mm.
Tell me what made you do the kind of double narrative where there was the story of them and then the story outside that? Like, what went through your mind when you were doing that?
Yeah, so if you haven't heard of this book or seen it, there is, of course, it is about a biography of Lewis and Tolkien's friendship. But inside of the story, in fact, we start the story with these two characters,
Mhm.
Lion and Wizard, and you know, just two things chosen totally at random. And they we meet them in a library at the break of dawn, and they're having tea together, and they don't quite know where they are.
Mm.
And we see the story through their eyes. They act as avatars for Lewis and Tolkien, obviously.
Yeah.
But one of the challenges in telling a story in a graphic format like this was just with Dietrich Bonhoeffer, it was a little different. Like, this is World War II. It's a
Yeah.
story about the Third Reich and assassination attempts. There's like a lot of action going on. With Lewis and Tolkien, there is like they are talking. Like, that is what they're doing. And there are different settings for them to talk,
Yeah.
but basically nothing else happens. So the Lion and the Wizard allow the viewer to go on some of the adventures that
Wow.
Lewis and Tolkien are writing about and sort of metaphorically explain some of those concepts and just make it a more visually rich story, and personally allow me to do like fan art of all of the things I wanted to draw inside of their stories without literally drawing their stories.
Yeah, the whole going through the myth and the different legends, the Hall of Myth, like just amazing. I mean, not only
Yeah.
did I learn a lot, but it was you packed so much into 1 or 2 pages there that you
Well,
had to stop and
they
pour
get to
over.
go on like a dungeon crawl, basically.
Yeah.
Like, the in Fellowship, the sort of adventure into Khazad-dûm, through the mines, that is the original dungeon crawl, and everyone wants that. Everyone who plays D&D is basically trying to recreate the feeling of first reading that
Wow.
adventure. And so, yeah, in this book, I'm like, okay, they gotta ride on a dragon, they gotta do a dungeon crawl, they've got to find some magic armor. Like there's things that I wanted them to do that then allows you to point to some of the concepts that are happening in sort of the Tolkien and Lewis story in the real world.
Yeah.
And yeah, so you kind of flip back and forth.
Yeah. I saw at the end of your book, I think it was the end of your book, you said, my ultimate goal is not pure scholarship, but translation. Unpack that for us. Like, what are you trying to say there?
Yeah, I'm just very careful not to position myself as a Tolkien and Lewis scholar. You know, I'm really in debt to the real people who are going to primary sources. And the stuff I read is mostly secondary sources, and I read a lot of it. But the ultimate thing I want you to take away is a story, a work of art. And I
Wow.
use facts and scholarship to support that. But ultimately, the thing that I'm trying to do is my own idea of what their life means, and it's
Wow.
not meant to sit alongside some of these other works. And so I'm just very I become a kind of like amateur expert in
Mm,
all of these subjects when I make a book. Like with the
wow.
Bonhoeffer book, I read a lot of his works, but I haven't read every piece of his scholarship. And you end up feeling really you're humbled by the amount that you do not know, even at the end of
Wow.
a project like this. So yeah,
Yeah.
I just try to make sure people realize that.
Yeah. I saw on your website that you took a trip overseas and traced Bonhoeffer's steps. That's wild. I mean, you're trying to embody the story in the best way possible to come out. And I've yet to read that book, so that's on my list and it's coming in Amazon too. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah,
But
I mean that to me, that's what's fun about these projects. Is I get to go on these trips, and especially when
so
I'm
cool.
making a visual book,
Yeah.
like I need to see the things that maybe are not always in the scholarly works. And
Wow.
so, going to when I was at, I mean, I went to Oxford in 2019 before Eagle and Child was closed, and
Wow.
all those drawings there that I made are made from my time in that pub. So, everything that you see visually, I've taken a lot of pains to make sure that it's accurate.
Wow. Is that opening back up again? They're hopefully redoing that.
So Lamb and Flag, their other haunt, which is right
Yep.
across the road, that was closed for a while too. That is now open. I
Okay.
have it on good authority that Bird and Baby is not open yet.
Okay.
It was bought by a hotel group, and I am confident that they are going to reopen it as a kind of literary destination.
Wow.
But how much renovation they do to the rabbit room, all that, we'll have to see. But
Uh,
hopefully it'll be okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So beautiful. I can't wait to go over there. What would be one thing as people read through this story? Because there are going to be people who don't know about Tolkien and Lewis. There's going to be people that are super nerds that read this, hopefully, because it's another Tolkien and Lewis book on their shelf, and it's just beautiful. It's a work of art. I mean, side note, I hope you're going to sell prints of these because I would put them up in my
Yeah,
office.
okay. Duly
Uh,
noted. Yeah, I got to work.
yeah, please. Or I'll just buy copies and cut it out and do my own thing. So
Yeah,
that's why.
yeah.
But what would you want someone to walk away with, besides just learning about their friendship? What would you want someone to feel or walk away with from this story?
Yeah, okay, so I think the reason why these stories still resonate with us is kind of a mystery in a way,
Wow.
like, and it's a beautiful mystery.
Yeah.
I think these both the works of Narnia and Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit are really about ideas of home
Hmm.
and of coming home, of finding home, of protecting home. And basically all myths sort of orbit around the same ideas, right?
Wow.
And so the book is called The Mythmakers, um, of course, meaning Tolkien and Lewis,
Yeah.
but also including every other human being in the world and including the creator, right? Like
Mm.
a part of the book that comes up that's so lovely is Tolkien's basically his argument to Lewis about why myths are not lies is this wonderful poem called Mythopoeia, where he writes, we make in the manner in which we were made. We write myths because we were made by a myth maker.
Hmm.
And so if you start pulling on the thread of like, why do I care about, if I'm just like a person who's never been to church, let's say, and I just love Lord of the Rings, to me, you start pulling on the thread of why do I like these things,
Wow.
it starts to unravel to the very core questions of human experience. And why are we always telling the same stories? And
Wow.
for Tolkien and Lewis, they found a particular conclusion about why stories ultimately matter,
Wow.
and why they're not lies. Or as Lewis's argument to Tolkien on that famous walk in Addison's Walk was like, I love the myths, but they're lies. They may be gilded in silver, but they are still lies. And of course, Tolkien said, no, they are not lies. So frankly, I've always wanted to hear a version of that famous conversation.
Yeah.
And so I do depict a little, a fictionalized version of what that might have sounded like.
It was so
In the
fun
book.
to read. It's like,
Yeah.
whoa. At first I was like, wait, is this what happened? How did he
Yeah.
know these conversations? I mean, we
Yeah.
have a poem, we have the letters, but he did a good job showing the arc of that even moment in their lives and climaxing in that kind of space. And then the motorcycle ride with his brother after, just so fun. You guys got to read the book. Okay. I got a couple more questions. I would love to know, we live in, just bring it back to our time, this moment in our cultural moment is really polarizing. It's getting more polarizing. It is, we live in a kind of this disenchanted world where things are just, we're cynical. It's easy to be cynical about things, and there's division. You turn on the news and it's not happy. I don't know if the news ever has been happy. What do you think, as you studied and as you have just read these stories and ingrained these stories into your heart, what's some lessons? Is there a lesson from these guys' life or stories that we need to kind of relearn in our moment right now that would help us?
Yeah, I think that's really true. I've often said, sort of jokingly, that I'm not a fan of the Enlightenment, basically because modernity has kind of like exhausted us
Yeah.
and has, as you said, disenchanted our world, where
Yeah.
the miraculous is basically stupid, or I don't know. I think it's why so many people read fantasy or actually play video games,
Wow.
because I think the video game desire to be submersed into this world, a fantasy world
Wow.
that allows our deepest longings for the miraculous to be real. I mean, Tolkien in I talk about this in the book, but his least read thing that everyone should read is called On Fairy Stories, and it's
Yes.
his justification for why these things should be considered serious popular matter.
Mm.
And he talks about fantasy as doing these three things together: escape, consolation, and recovery. and
Wow.
and all of these things in fantasy, and you see it in video games or in any of the other things that we as a
Yeah.
culture now would like desperately not just watch but consume, identify with, and like submerge ourselves in, is because we are longing for these things that remind us of something, as Tolkien said, as joy beyond the walls of our own world, right?
Wow.
And fantasy does that. It does that. You cannot argue that it does not do that. And to me, that is why there is still a pull for this. And the material world has frankly all bummed us out. And so, that is why Lewis was so obsessed with the medieval framework of the universe.
Yeah.
And again, all these things just kind of point back to the same center as to why these guys invested so much of their life in this craft.
Wow. That's beautiful. Yeah, it does something. It just makes you, has different filters on your eyes when you look at the world through this kind of stuff. I mean, that's what it did for me. I was laughing at my wife as she read fiction stories. And I'm like, nah, I'm gonna read nonfiction and historical stuff and theology. And during COVID, I pick up The Hobbit, and I was like, oh my gosh, I am such a foolish man for not, like, I'm the one now nerding out. I'm the one that has 80 Tolkien books. I'm the one that has a YouTube channel and Twitter account. And my wife's now laughing at me. But
Yeah.
these stories moved me. I caught myself reading Return of the King for the first time to my kids, crying at the end of the story. Like, it did something. It did what Lewis talks about. It lifts the veil of familiarity so I can see things in a fresh way.
On the Rings of Power episode 4, I was crying during the Tom Bombadil scene,
Yes.
which is absurd. It's like an absurd thing to make me emotional, but again, can you, if I was like to chart out why that makes me emotional, I truly can't fully explain it, but I think it is a sort of longing for a home we want but have never seen. Like there's all these sort of things that ping.
Beautiful.
Like the Shire to Tolkien was this, like, one, it was like the loss of pastoral England in his mind.
Yeah.
But it was also like um, a reminder that the things that we are longing for, that homeness, that safety, that peace, that like normal everyday life.
Yeah.
That was the thing that the book enshrines as the highest value, as opposed to like a heroism or romance or any of maybe other things that maybe you think like in your mind fantasy is about. But for both Tolkien and Lewis, it was for Lewis, it was in Narnia. It was the ultimate, the home, where this was chapter 1 of the great story, and every chapter after that was better than the one that came before. That's the end of the Narnia stories. Yeah. So.
Wow. Gosh. Yeah, we can nerd out for a long time. I love this conversation and where it's gone. I love this book, and I hope that everyone picks it up. You would do yourself a favor to gift this to people, because if they are wondering, if they're lovers of this good stories, but wondering where they came from, it does so much to learn about the people who created these stories. And what impacted them, the good, and you don't shy away from those moments in the war where it was bad.
Yeah.
And it all kind of made this beautiful thing come out of it.
Yeah, so this is the Christmas present of the year. Make it happen.
There you go. You heard it, people. We're already there. It's what month is it? September?
Yeah,
you can
no,
do your Christmas shopping early.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes. I don't want to ask this, but I want to. Is there any future research topics you are thinking about, even though this book hasn't come out? Is there anything on your mind where maybe you would say, this is the thing I'm focusing on because it's coming out, but is there something you would love to write about in the future?
You're just like my editor, they're just never satisfied. No, yeah, actually, I do have some projects in the works. My next book is a sequel to Drawing is Magic, which was my sketchbook activity book called 100 Things. Awesome. But my next graphic novel is, I'm just starting my reading and research right now. I want to retell the Salem witch trials as like a horror story in a way. And, once again, focusing on a kind of Christian community and what happens when, like in Bonhoeffer, the fellowship was sort of rebellious. And in Mythmakers, the fellowship was generative. So with the Salem, what happens when a fellowship is sort of destructive? That'll, if you're interested in sort of being scared and bummed out, look for that in 5 years.
What a great Christmas present. That's another great Christmas present.
That may not work on the Christmas circuit. I might want to revise this idea.
We'll come out, make sure it's for Halloween. So, John, thank you for this time. Thank you for putting your work out there. I would put you in the same vein of impact, because you are telling stories. You're telling stories with your words and also with your art. And I think it's a beautiful way to show off that we're made for something more. So appreciate you. Where can people find you and follow you online?
JohnHendrix.com is my website. I'm at John Hendrix on Instagram. And send me an email or shoot me a DM. Happy to chat.
I love it. John, appreciate you. Thanks for tuning in, guys, for our first interview. Hopefully you're inspired. Hopefully you see that these stories matter, that we're made for something more than this life. And these things just point to something more beautiful. And so appreciate you guys. John, thank you so much, friend.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.